The wind rolled through the trees like it had somewhere to be fast, cold, and full of warnings. In the small mountain town of Crestwood, most folks were already huddled indoors by mid-afternoon. The sky was gray, the kind of gray that made everything feel quieter than it should. No birds, no traffic, just the sound of bare branches clacking together like bones. 10-year-old Eli Whitaker knew he wasn't supposed to be out this late. His mom would panic if she found out he'd wandered off again, especially this close to the old iron bridge. Every kid in town was told the same thing. Don't go near it. It's too old, too slippery, too dangerous. But Eli hadn't meant to end up here. He'd only been walking. Sometimes when the house got too loud or too quiet, he just needed to move. And today was one of those days. He kicked at a patch of frozen mud hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets. The river below, usually a lazy trickle, was now a mess of broken ice and roaring meltwater. It had rained the night before, and the snow on the higher ridges was starting to give way. Eli turned to head back, and then he heard it. At first he thought it was just the river shifting. But then there it was again, a sharp splash. Not water against rock, something heavier. And then a whimper. Eli froze. He stepped cautiously toward the wooden rail of the bridge and leaned over, bracing against the wind. At first he didn't see anything, just gray water churning between jagged ice and fallen logs. But then movement. Caught between two rocks near the bend was a dog, a large one, brown and black with a thick coat soaked and trembling. Its head bobbed just above the surface, front paws flailing against the current, one leg twisted unnaturally. Eli's breath caught in his throat. The dog was going under, and no one else was there to see it. He didn't think, he just moved. The trail down to the riverbank was steep and slick with wet leaves, but he slid his way down, grabbing branches, nearly falling twice. When he reached the edge, the cold smacked him in the face like a warning. The river was deeper than it looked from above, and faster. But the dog was closer now, caught on something, eyes wide with panic and pain. Eli's heart pounded. He stepped into the shallows, his boots instantly filling with icy water. He winced but kept going, teeth chattering. "Hang on," he whispered. "I've got you." The current pushed hard against his legs, nearly knocking him over. But he made it to the rock, grabbed the dog by its collar, and pulled. The animal yelped in pain. Its back leg was clearly injured, but didn't fight. Eli dug his heels into the riverbed and leaned back, using every ounce of strength his small frame had. With one final jerk, the dog slipped free from the rocks and collapsed into his arms. They both tumbled backward into the cold. Eli gasped as the river soaked through his jacket. The dog whimpered again, shivering violently but didn't move. Its weight was heavy against Eli's chest, solid, real alive. "Okay," Eli panted. "You're okay now. I got you." He wrapped his arms tighter around the dog, then began the slow, slippery climb back up the bank, cradling the animal as best he could. His fingers were numb. His jeans were soaked and sticking to his legs. But somehow they made it. They collapsed near the edge of the woods, both shaking, both breathing hard. Eli looked down at the dog. It was a German shepherd, or close to one. Its fur was caked with mud and blood, its ears tattered, and its eyes, those amber eyes, looked so tired, so scared. "Where did you come from?" Eli whispered. The dog didn't respond, but it didn't growl either. It just stared at him, breathing shallow and fast. "You're hurt," Eli said more to himself. "Someone left you here." The thought made his chest ache. He knew he couldn't carry the dog all the way home. And even if he could, what then? His mom would never let him keep it. They barely had enough to keep the lights on most months. She was doing her best, working 2 jobs and still losing sleep over bills. Noah, his older brother, would say the dog was a waste of time. Just another stray, not their problem. But Eli didn't care. He couldn't just leave it here. So instead of heading toward town, he turned toward the old ranger shack at the edge of the forest, a place he'd found months ago during one of his wanderings. It was half falling down, full of cobwebs and dust, but it had a roof, a space heater, and a thick wool blanket someone had left behind. It would have to do. It took nearly 40 minutes, dragging and coaxing and pausing every few feet to rest. But by the time the sun dipped below the treetops, Eli had made a bed in the corner of the shack, wrapped the dog in the blanket, and turned on the heater. He knelt beside the animal, wiping blood and grit from its fur with the sleeve of his shirt. "You're gonna be okay," he said softly. The dog looked up at him just for a second and let out a slow, exhausted breath. Then it closed its eyes. Eli stayed there long after the last light faded from the window. He didn't check his phone, didn't care if his mom was mad, didn't care if Noah called him soft again, because tonight he'd save someone. Maybe for the first time in his life, he'd done something that mattered. And as he leaned back against the wall, cold and tired but strangely calm, the dog stirred just slightly and rested its head against his leg. No words, no barking, just trust. The kind that doesn't come easy, the kind that changes everything. By sunrise, Eli was already awake. His back ached from sleeping on the cold wooden floor, but he barely noticed. All he could think about was the dog curled up beside the heater, still alive, still breathing, and still nameless. He studied the animal in the pale morning light. The dog's coat, though matted and dirty, was thick and healthy beneath the grime. Its ribs showed and its back leg was badly swollen, maybe broken. But what struck Eli most were the scars, dozens of them, thin-healed lines beneath the fur. Old wounds. Who would do this to a dog? Eli reached out slowly. "Hey, buddy." The German Shepherd's ears flicked. It lifted its head and looked at him, eyes alert but not aggressive. That was something. Eli smiled a little. "You made it through the night." "So did I." He didn't stay long. He knew if he wasn't home by breakfast, his mom would call the sheriff's office. Again. Before he left, he folded the blanket tighter around the dog and left the last half of his granola bar beside its paw. "I'll come back later, I promise." The dog didn't move, but it watched him the whole time. Eli jogged home, boots squelching with half-frozen mud. When he slipped through the back door, his brother Noah was already at the table, scarfing cereal with his headphones on. Their mom stood at the stove pouring coffee with one hand, scrolling her phone with the other. "Where were you?" she asked without looking up. "Just out," Eli said quickly. "Needed air." "In 34 degrees. He shrugged. "Couldn't sleep." She sighed but didn't push. Just handed him a piece of toast. "Eat something. You've got school in an hour." Eli nodded and sat, but his mind was already back in the forest. At recess, while the other kids kicked around a half-deflated soccer ball, Eli sat on the hill behind the swings and sketched in his notebook. He drew the dog, long snout, one tattered ear fur, thick like armor. Beneath it, he scribbled, "Wolfsuri e wolf." But it wasn't a wolf. It was a shepherd. A big one. Maybe part military or police. The kind of dog that used to matter to someone. So why had no one come looking? By the time school let out, a cold drizzle had started to fall. Eli didn't go home. He cut behind the football field, through the old cemetery and back into the woods. When he reached the shack, his heart stopped. The door was open. His feet splashed through puddles as he rushed inside, only to stop short. The dog was still there, but someone had left a collar beside it. Not the kind with a name tag or license. This one was thick military grade and engraved with metal letters. X0119, K-Taman Unit. Eli's chest tightened. He hadn't brought that collar, which meant someone else had. He spun around, scanning the trees through the rain. No movement. No footprints in the mud except his own. He shut the door quickly and knelt beside the dog. "Did someone come here? Did they try to take you?" The shepherd didn't respond, but he was alert now, ears perked. Eli grabbed the collar and shoved it into his backpack. "I won't let them hurt you again," he whispered. That night, Eli barely touched his dinner. "Something wrong?" his mom asked. "Just tired." "You're always tired." He nodded. "I'll go to bed early." She stared at him for a moment, but didn't say more. Upstairs, Eli opened his backpack and pulled out the collar. 019. It sounded more like a serial number than a name. He turned it over and found something else etched in the side. Property of DRARP. He grabbed his tablet and started searching. It didn't take long. Dodger Warnier 1 RP, Defense Animal Research Program. A logo appeared, a stylized eagle stars and a leashed German shepherd in silhouette. Underneath it, developing K9 technology to support national security. Eli blinked. "Are you some kind of government dog?" he whispered. The next few days became routine. School, homework, then the woods. Each time the dog looked a little better. The swelling in his leg was going down, though he still couldn't stand on it for long. Eli brought bits of chicken he hid from dinner, bandaged the worst wounds with gauze he snuck from the medicine cabinet, and even taught him to respond to the name Ghost. It seemed to fit. Silent, strong, watching everything. And Ghost responded to it slowly at first, then with more clarity each time. Ghost, Eli would say, holding up a treat stay. And he would. Not perfectly, but better than before. Like someone had trained him once. Someone serious. Someone cruel. On Friday, something changed. Eli was helping Ghost sip water when the dog suddenly growled. Low, deep, warning. Eli turned fast. At the edge of the tree stood a man in a dark coat, maybe late 40s. Short hair, sunglasses, even though the sky was overcast. He held a phone in one hand and was speaking softly into it. Eli ducked low and watched through the shack's broken blinds. The man didn't approach, just stood there, watching. Then after maybe 20 seconds, he turned and walked back into the woods. Ghost didn't stop growling until long after he was gone. That night, Eli couldn't sleep. He sat on his bed, knees pulled to his chest, Ghost's collar in his hands. If someone wanted the dog back, why? And if they'd gone through all this trouble to get rid of him in the first place? Eli's breath hitched. Maybe Ghost wasn't just thrown in the river. Maybe he was meant to disappear. He grabbed his flashlight and his jacket. He had to get back to the shack. He had to move Ghost. Now. Eli sprinted through the trees like a shadow. His flashlight bounced wildly in the dark, cutting through the fog that clung low to the ground. Every branch snapped behind him sounded like a footstep. Every rustle made his heart thud harder. By the time he reached the shack, he was breathless and soaked with cold sweat. Ghost, he called, voice trembling. No answer. He threw the door open. The shack was still. Then from the corner, the thick blanket stirred. The dog lifted his head slowly, groggily, but okay. Eli sank to his knees, relief washing over him so hard it made him dizzy. Thank God. Ghost blinked up at him, clearly confused. Someone's watching this place, Eli whispered. We can't stay here anymore. He moved quickly, stuffing a box of supplies into his backpack. Dog food, gauze, a flashlight, the heating pad. Everything he'd smuggled out over the last week. He looked at Ghost's leg. Still swollen, but better. He could limp now. Come on, boy, Eli whispered. We gotta go. It took nearly an hour to get them to the abandoned silo behind the old mill road, an odd concrete dome, half buried in weeds forgotten by most of the town. Eli had found it months ago during one of his solo hikes and kept it a secret. It wasn't warm, but it was dry. And more importantly, it was invisible. Ghost collapsed onto the musty floor, too exhausted to protest. Eli tucked a sleeping bag around him and checked the bandages. You're safe now, he whispered. Nobody knows about this place. Ghost's eyes closed, but Eli didn't sleep. He sat beside the dog until the first light of morning filtered through the broken vent above. After school the next day, Eli slipped into the public library not for books, but for answers. He logged into a side computer where no one could see over his shoulder and typed, DARP X019 missing. Nothing. He tried again. Defense Animal Research Program, plus German Shepherd escape. Still nothing. It wasn't until he added whistleblower reports that something popped up. A redacted government memo posted to a watchdog blog. Following the early termination of the X-Series trial, 6 canine units were decommissioned. X019 was presumed deceased after an unplanned field disruption during Operation Halfgate. Recovery protocol failed due to section redacted. The last sentence made Eli's stomach twist. Any surviving unit is to be considered volatile and non-public facing. Containment must be discreet. No digital records, no media exposure. He leaned back in the chair. They hadn't just lost the dog. They'd abandoned him. And now they wanted him gone quietly. Permanently. Eli stared at the screen, his heart racing. Ghost wasn't just any dog. He was part of something bigger, something dangerous. And if these people were still looking for him, Eli swallowed hard. Keeping Ghost safe wasn't just a good deed anymore. It was a rescue mission. Later that night, Eli brought a small flashlight and a bag of canned chili to the silo. Ghost was waiting, sitting up, this time, ears perked. He barked once, soft but alert. You knew they were coming for you, didn't you? Eli said. He set the flashlight on a rock and pulled something from his backpack, a dog harness with a mount he found in his brother's old ROTC gear. Gently, he slipped it onto Ghost. You're not just a stray, you were trained. Ghost didn't flinch. He stood still as Eli adjusted the straps. Let's see what else they taught you. Eli picked up a stick and gave a firm command. Track. Ghost didn't move. Eli frowned. Track, he repeated. This time, Ghost lowered his nose to the ground, sniffed the dirt near the silo door, then limped forward slow, deliberate steps. Eli stared. You do remember. The next few days were a blur of school, quick visits to the silo, and constant paranoia. Eli avoided his brother, dodged questions from his mom, and faked a stomach bug to stay home and researched more about DRP. But answers were scarce. Even the local sheriff's office had nothing. They won't talk to regular people, he muttered one night to Ghost curled beside him. But maybe. He stopped, then picked up his phone. There was one person in town who might know something if he was still around. Deputy Miles Hargrove, retired, but he used to train police dogs before switching to regular patrol. If Ghost had ever been near law enforcement, even secretly, Miles might recognize something. Eli found him the next day outside the hardware store, tossing bags of seed into a truck, "Mr. Hargrove?" he asked nervously. The man turned tall, broad-shouldered, a gray beard framing his jaw. "That's me. I was wondering if I could ask about canine dogs." Miles squinted at him. "School project." Eli nodded quickly. "Sort of. But like special units, government ones." Miles raised an eyebrow. "You're in 4th grade." "5th. A pause. Miles chuckled. "You Whitaker's boy." "Yeah, Gamash. Come on, I'll buy you a cocoa. But if this is a prank, I'll call your mom myself." Inside the diner, Eli pulled out his sketchbook. He turned to the most recent drawing, Ghost's face down to the smallest scar. Below it, the collar X019 DARP. Miles went still. His spoon froze in midair. "Where'd you see that name?" Eli hesitated. "He's hurt. I found him." "Where?" "I can't say. He trusts me." Miles leaned in. "Kid, you have no idea what kind of storm you're sitting in. Then tell me." A long silence passed. Then Miles sighed. "I heard whispers 5 years ago. Special dogs. Not police, not military. Something in between. They weren't supposed to exist. But a few handlers talked. Said one of the dogs snapped during training, that it bit a general clean through the forearm. They shut down the whole program." "Did they kill the dogs?" "They tried." Eli's stomach dropped. "I think mine escaped," he said softly. Miles nodded slowly. "Then you better hide him good, because if they know he's alive..." Eli looked out the window at the falling snow. "They'll come again." That night, Ghost refused to eat. He paced the silo ears, twitching at every sound. Eli could feel it too, the weight in the air like something was shifting. "Tomorrow," he whispered, stroking the dog's fur. "We'll leave town. I'll figure it out." But even as he said it, something inside him knew. They were already too late. It started with a drone. Just a low, almost insect-like hum that drifted across the treetops near the silo. Barely noticeable. Easy to mistake for wind. But Ghost heard it. He stiffened before Eli did, ears forward, hackles, raised his eyes following something invisible in the sky. Then came the faint red blinking light just over the ridge. Eli stepped outside the silo, heart thudding. There it was, small, sleek, and scanning. Not a hobby drone, not a toy, military grade. "They found us," Eli whispered. Ghost growled low in his throat. "Come on," Eli said, grabbing his backpack. "We're leaving, now." Eli had no plan, just adrenaline and instinct. He and Ghost moved fast through the woods, staying in shadows, ducking under branches, crossing the creek to throw off heat signatures. The sun hadn't even come up yet, but Eli knew the clock had started ticking. By the time they reached the edge of the abandoned quarry, Eli was soaked in sweat despite the cold. Ghost limped behind him, still favoring his back leg, but faster than before. They found shelter inside an old concrete mixer, tilted on its side, rusted through and covered in moss. Eli tossed in a blanket and collapsed beside the dog, panting. "We'll rest here for a bit," he said, "just for an hour." But Ghost wouldn't lie down. He paced the perimeter of the mixer, ears twitching, nose in the air. Then he stopped and growled. Footsteps. Eli scrambled up and peeked through a hole in the wall. 2 men in tactical jackets were sweeping the tree line with flashlights. No markings, no badges. They weren't local law enforcement. "Check the water line," one said. "We lost the signal near the silo." "Think the kid's still with it." "Doesn't matter. If the dog's alive, we finish the job this time." Eli's heart nearly stopped. He turned to Ghost, whispering, "They're not just looking for you. They want you dead." Ghost leaned his head against Eli's arm. Not afraid, but ready. They moved again after dark. This time, Eli didn't go to town. Instead, he remembered something Deputy Hargrove had once told him about a hidden cave on Lantern Ridge used by bootleggers decades ago. Hard to find, harder to access. Perfect. It took them nearly 4 hours of hiking in the dark through thick underbrush and sharp rock. Ghost never once let Eli out of his sight, even when his limp worsened. When they finally reached the rock face, Eli used an old stick to wedge open a half-hidden crevice barely wide enough for them to crawl through. Inside, it was pitch black, cold, silent, but safe, at least for now. Eli lit a tea light from his emergency kit and placed it near the back wall. As the flickering glow filled the cave, he took off his pack and pulled out the metal collar again. X-19. He turned it in his hands. What had they trained you to do? Why were they so afraid of you? He pulled out his notebook, flipping through sketches, thoughts, maps. His handwriting was messier now, jittery. At the back, he found the torn piece of envelope where Miles Hargrove had scrawled something just before Eli left. "Look up Halfgate Red Lab DARP." Eli had no signal. But if he could get to Wi-Fi even for 5 minutes, maybe he could finally learn the truth. The next day, Ghost surprised him. When Eli whistled softly to signal breakfast, Ghost stood up on all 4 legs. The limp was still there, but he stood. "You're healing," Eli said, grinning. Ghost stepped closer and nudged his shoulder, then licked his cheek. It was the first real sign of affection the dog had shown. Eli felt something warm bloom in his chest, relief, joy, and something else. Pride. Later that afternoon, they made a risky move. They climbed back down Lantern Ridge and into town just as the sun dipped low, slipping through alleyways and hopping fences until they reached Rusty's garage, a junkyard where Eli's friend Jonah sometimes stole Wi-Fi for his tablet. They crouched behind a rusted RV near the fence line, close enough to snag a weak signal. Eli pulled out his phone and tapped into the connection. It was slow, but it worked. He typed, DWRP Halfgate Red Lab declassified. One document popped up, unverified, redacted, posted by a whistleblower group. He opened it. Project Halfgate, Phase 3. Test summary subjects X019, X022. Enhancements included behavioral override conditioning, lethal deterrent response, and threat pattern imprinting. All subjects displayed advanced target discrimination during simulation. X019, Ghost terminated unauthorized personnel at 4:19 a.m. Internal investigation classified. Lab red flagged. Subject X019 removed from active roster. Then this reinforcement training failed. X0119 demonstrated persistent loyalty to unauthorized child handler. Escaped compound via river breach during decommissioning protocol. Eli stopped breathing. He reread the last line again. Loyalty to an unauthorized child handler. It wasn't the first time Ghost had bonded with a kid. Who was that child? And what had happened to them? He downloaded the file and deleted all traces. Then he turned to Ghost. You ran before. You saved a kid before. Ghost tilted his head. You remember, don't you? That night, Eli couldn't sleep. His phone battery was dead. The cave was freezing. But he didn't care, because now he understood. They weren't just chasing Ghost. They were chasing what Ghost knew. And somehow Eli had taken the place of that first child. The one Ghost had once protected. The one they tried to erase from every file. The next morning, Eli woke up to barking. Not from Ghost, but from outside. Eli ran until his legs gave out. Branches whipped his face. Mud caked his jeans. Every breath felt like fire in his lungs. But Ghost never left his side, not even once. Even limping, the dog stayed a step behind him, checking over his shoulder every few seconds, herding him forward like it was his job. And maybe Eli thought it was. They crashed through a clearing at the far end of the woods where an old hunting tower stood watch over a frozen field. Eli had passed it before half collapsed and empty. No one came out this far anymore. He climbed the creaky ladder, Ghost following, awkwardly clawing his way up the incline like he'd done it before. They reached the top just as the first snowflakes began to fall. Eli pulled the tarp over the slanted roof and wrapped his jacket around Ghost, who curled up in the corner, panting heavily. They were safe for now, but only barely. By morning, the cold had grown sharper. A bitter wind swept through the tower, and Eli could see his own breath clouding the air. He unzipped his pack and pulled out a dented thermos, filled with chicken broth, still faintly warm. Ghost lapped it slowly, blinking up at him. You remembered a kid, Eli said quietly. Another boy, before me. Ghost blinked. You ran away to save him, didn't you? Ghost didn't answer, but his eyes never left Eli's face. That afternoon, Eli made a decision. They needed answers, real ones. He thought of Miles Hargrove, the retired deputy who had trained police dogs and whispered warnings about the DARP program. But there was one other person he remembered, someone older, someone who had quit the force entirely after something went wrong with a K-9 operation. Ruth Dalton. People called her a recluse. She lived in a trailer out by the state line and hadn't spoken to anyone in years. But Eli had seen her once, at a 4th of July cookout years ago. She wore a ball cap, army boots, and didn't smile much. And she had once handled a dog just like Ghost. It took nearly a day to reach her place on foot. By the time they arrived, Eli's legs were trembling from exhaustion. Ghost leaned into him for support, and together they limped up to a rusting mailbox that read, Dalton, in peeling white paint. He knocked. Nothing. He knocked again, harder. Footsteps. Then the door creaked open. A woman in her 60s stood there, gray ponytail flannel shirt, one hand on a cane, the other on the doorframe. Her eyes narrowed at Eli, then dropped to Ghost. And something changed in her face. Slowly, she stepped onto the porch. "Where did you find that dog?" she asked, voice rough like gravel. "He found me," Eli said. His collar said X019. She stared for a long time. Then she opened the door wider. "Get in, and don't say a word until I close the blinds." Inside, the trailer smelled like old wood and gun oil. A wall of photos, dogs, all German shepherds, lined one side of the hallway. Eli recognized the structure of training routines, jump walls, bite sleeves, obstacle courses. But one photo caught his eye. It was a black and white picture of a boy, maybe 8 or 9, smiling, freckles scattered across his cheeks. And beside him, Ghost. Not just a similar dog, the same dog. Eli turned to Ruth, eyes wide. Who was he? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she sat down and lit a cigarette with trembling fingers. "That boy," she said quietly, "was named Ben. My nephew. I raised him after his mom died. Smart, funny, wouldn't stop talking. He was the one who named the dog Ghost." Eli's heart pounded. Ghost sat near the door, head tilted, eyes soft. "I was part of a federal contract," Ruth continued. "They wanted to create a dog that could assess human behavior in real time. Threat modeling, emotional targeting. Ghost was their prototype. What happened? They trained him with live scenarios," she said bitterly. "Too much, too fast. Ghost started picking up things we didn't even program. He'd ignore adult commands if he sensed fear or confusion. But with Ben," she paused. "He was calm, focused, almost gentle." Eli nodded. "He's been that way with me too." "Because you remind him of Ben," Ruth said. "You're quiet. You lead with empathy. That's what Ghost responds to." Eli swallowed hard. "What happened to him?" Ruth stared at the floor. "They told me it was an accident, that Ben wandered into a training field during an exercise. But I don't buy it. The day before he'd told me something scary, said a man came to the facility at night, whispering to Ghost, giving him new commands." Her voice cracked. "The next morning, Ben was gone, and Ghost disappeared a day later." Eli felt the breath leave his lungs. "They tried to erase him," Ruth said. "Both of them." Eli looked at Ghost. The dog wasn't just some broken animal. He was a witness, maybe even a survivor. That night, Ruth set them up with food-warm blankets and a burner phone. "If they're still tracking you," she said, "you've got less than 48 hours before they try again." "I can't leave him behind," Eli said. "I'm not asking you to." She walked over and placed something heavy on the table, a flash drive sealed in plastic. "It's everything I saved. Photos, records, training logs. Proof that Ghost didn't attack anyone unprovoked. They wanted to program obedience, but they got something more powerful. What one nano 1 year, with her one in mountain. Judgment," she said. "Ghost doesn't just follow orders, he decides." Eli stared at the drive. "If we get this to the media, they'll deny it," Ruth said. "But if Ghost appears in public alive, healthy, free, they can't bury him again." Eli nodded. He had a new mission now. Later, as he curled up beside Ghost under a patched blanket, Eli whispered, "You saved him once. You saved Ben." Ghost pressed his nose gently into Eli's chest. "I'm not going to let them do it again." Outside, the wind howled across the trees. But inside that tiny trailer, for the first time in days, Eli felt peace. Not because the danger had passed, but because they had a plan. Eli sat on the edge of the rusted trailer bed, Ghost's head resting in his lap, the flash drive heavy in his pocket. He knew the plan wasn't bulletproof, but it was all they had. Ruth had made calls, quiet ones, to a friend at a Denver news station, someone who owed her a favor. If they could reach the city, if they could show the world Ghost was alive, was healing, was still capable of trust, then maybe the government wouldn't be able to bury him again, or the truth. They left at dawn. Ruth stayed behind, shotgun across her lap, just in case the men in black returned to her land. Eli and Ghost climbed into her old pickup and followed the county roads west, away from the forest, away from the shadows. Ghost sat alert in the back seat, head out the window, tongue flapping in the wind like he remembered what freedom felt like. It was the first time Eli saw him smile. Just 10 miles outside the city, everything fell apart. A dark SUV pulled up behind them. Then another, and another. 3 vehicles, Eli muttered, gripping the steering wheel tighter. No plates. He didn't slow down. But the road ahead narrowed, a construction zone on the bridge leading into downtown. A perfect trap. He slammed the gas. Ghost braced himself in the back. The first SUV pulled alongside them, and a man inside shouted something Eli couldn't hear. Another leaned out the window, gun in hand, aiming not at Eli, but at Ghost. "No!" Eli screamed, swerving hard to the left. Tires screeched. The truck fishtailed. They crashed into a construction barrier and skidded sideways into a shallow ditch. Eli's vision blurred. Everything rang. But the second he came to Ghost was already out the door, snarling, barking, circling the truck. 3 men approached, shouting commands. "Don't let the boy get to the flash drive. Subdue the dog. Ghost stood between them and Eli, every muscle tight, tail low, ears back. One of the men moved in with a taser. Ghost lunged. What happened next wasn't a blur. Eli remembered every second. Ghost took the taser, hit to the shoulder but kept moving, took the man down, disarmed him, then turned to the second attacker, growling low, showing his teeth. They weren't prepared. They didn't expect him to fight for someone. Not again. Not after Ben. Not after everything they'd done to erase that memory. But Ghost remembered. And this time, he didn't hesitate. The chaos only stopped when sirens roared down the highway and a Denver police unit arrived on scene. Eli had managed to hit Ruth's emergency call button, and her contact at the station had routed it to local PD. By the time the officers pulled up, the SUVs were empty. The men had fled, but not before one thing was left behind. A small black phone with a screen still lit. Subject compromised, terminate Ghost asset. Eli showed everything. Flash drive, the call log, the photos. He told the officers everything, and for the first time, someone listened. The next day, the news report aired nationwide. Not just about the secret K9 program, but about the boy who risked everything to save a dog the world forgot. Ghost's face filled the screen. Not as a weapon, but as a survivor. A week later, they were invited to the state capitol for a press conference. Eli stood on stage, suit too big for him, hands trembling. But Ghost sat beside him, proud, strong, alive. Some people told me I was just a kid, Eli said into the microphone, that I didn't know what I was doing. But I knew one thing: this dog wasn't dangerous. He was hurt, he was alone, and he was trying to protect someone. He paused. I think sometimes animals remember better than people do. The room was silent. Then came the applause. Ghost was granted permanent sanctuary status under the Heroes for Animals Act, an emergency ruling passed to protect animals involved in federal misconduct cases. Ruth was offered a full pardon and a new title, Senior K9 Recovery Liaison. And Eli, he went home with the dog who remembered him. 3 months later, Ghost started training again, not for war, but for healing. Therapy sessions with traumatized kids, PTSD programs for veterans, school visits to teach children about animal empathy. Wherever Eli went, Ghost followed. Wherever Ghost went, Eli led. They weren't just partners. They were survivors. On a warm afternoon in spring, Eli sat beneath the willow tree in his backyard, the same one he used to cry under alone. Now he had a friend by his side. I think Ben would be proud of you, he whispered, stroking Ghost's fur. Ghost rested his head in Eli's lap and sighed. Thank you for staying with us through the journey of Eli and Ghost, a story about trust, resilience, and the kind of love that never forgets. Now we want to hear from you. What would you have done if you found a wounded dog with a secret worth dying for? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to Heroes for Animals for more powerful true stories that celebrate the animals who save us and the humans brave enough to save them back. 6 months after the story broke, the world had mostly moved on. The news cycle had shifted. Politicians argued over who authorized what. The task force investigating the DRP program hit a wall of classified documents and blacked out names. But in one quiet corner of Colorado, life was beginning again. For a boy and a dog, Eli was no longer invisible. He still didn't talk much in class, but now the silence came with gravity. When he walked into a room, kids paused. Teachers smiled. Strangers recognized him at gas stations. But fame was never what he wanted. He just wanted Ghost to be safe. And Ghost, he was thriving. His limp was gone. His coat had filled in glossy and thick. His eyes sparkled when he saw kids. He could still read fear, but now he leaned into it, gently nudging kids who were hurting, curling beside them, like he was saying, I've been there too. One weekend in July, Eli and Ruth returned to the old training facility together. It had been shut down months earlier pending investigation. The building sat hollow and rotting, now a ghost of its former self. But Ruth had received a strange tip from a retired staffer who'd read the story and wanted to help. There's something you need to see, the man had said. Room 4A, beneath the floor. Eli hadn't wanted to come at first. The place gave him chills, but Ruth insisted, and Ghost had led the way. Inside room 4A, the air was heavy. The walls still had outlines where computers used to sit. Metal brackets dangled from the ceiling where cables once hung. And near the far wall, a section of floorboard creaked differently when stepped on. Ghost walked to that spot without hesitation and pawed at it. Eli knelt and pried up the panel. Underneath, wrapped in plastic and sealed with medical tape, was a faded spiral notebook and a letter yellowed from time and water damage. The name on the envelope was written in crayon. For Ben from Ghost's handler. Ruth gasped. She took the notebook and turned page after page, logs, diagrams, behavioral notes, hand-drawn sketches of Ghost playing, Ghost sleeping, Ghost looking at the boy with trust in his eyes. It wasn't a report. It was a diary, and it didn't belong to a scientist. It belonged to Ben. They sat for an hour in silence reading. Ben had written about how Ghost calmed down when music played, how he refused to hurt small animals, how he once sat beside Ben during a thunderstorm and wouldn't move until the lightning stopped. But the last entry changed everything. Ghost doesn't like him, the man with the glasses. He tries to pet him, but Ghost freezes. And when I tell the man to leave Ghost alone, he says it's not my place. The Ghost isn't mine, but he is. Ghost chose me, not him. And I think they're going to do something to him, or to me. If you find this, please don't forget us. Eli's hands shook. Ghost lay beside him on the concrete, calm, his head resting on the torn envelope. Back home, Ruth called the whistleblower group again. The journal and letter were scanned, verified, and published anonymously. Within a week, New Year's Eve, Ben and Ghost was trending across social media. Artists made paintings. A retired Air Force colonel came forward to say he'd objected to the program years earlier and had been silenced. But it wasn't just exposure. It was recognition that a child's bond with a dog had outlasted even the most dangerous cover-up. Later that summer, a statue was unveiled in their hometown. It stood in the courtyard of the local library, a bronze boy kneeling beside a German shepherd, one hand on the dog's shoulder, their eyes locked. The plaque beneath read, "For those who remember, for those who protect, for the boy who saw through silence, and the dog who refused to forget." Eli stood there during the dedication ceremony, Ghost by his side. Reporters asked how he felt. He didn't say much, just whispered, "It's not about being a hero. It's about listening. Ghost listened to me when no one else did, so I listened back." As the first leaves of autumn began to fall, Eli and Ghost sat under the willow tree again. He watched the sun bleed orange over the fields. "I think he knew we'd find it," Eli said, scratching behind Ghost's ears. "Ben left it for you, and you waited all this time." Ghost licked his hand once, then laid his head in his lap. Peaceful, whole. "We want to thank you for walking through this entire journey, for believing in the quiet strength of a child and in the memory of a dog who refused to let go. Sonne war Sirm. Now we'd love to hear from you. What does loyalty mean to you? And have you ever had an animal that trusted you more than anyone else in the world? Leave your answer below. And if this story moved, you consider subscribing to Heroes for Animals for more powerful tales of the bonds that heal, protect, and change lives forever. 1 year had passed since Eli and Ghost stood on that stage together. 12 months since they cracked open a secret sealed by silence and stitched together a bond so unbreakable even death had failed to erase it. The world still buzzed with noise, of course. News cycles shifted, elections came and went, programs were rebranded. But in the heart of a quiet Colorado town, something sacred had taken root. A boy, a dog, and a truth that refused to stay buried. Eli was taller now. His voice had changed slightly, but his quiet strength remained. He still wore that same faded red hoodie, the one he had when he first found Ghost at the river, even though it barely fit. He didn't wear it for comfort. He wore it because that hoodie still smelled faintly of hope. Ghost had slowed a little. His sprints were shorter, his naps longer, but his eyes, they still held that same soft fire, the one that only lit up when he saw Eli. When the world around them got loud, Eli's hand always found Ghost's fur, and everything quieted again. They now lived with Ruth in a 2-bedroom house on the edge of town. The town council had voted unanimously to make her property tax-free, calling her a keeper of community legacy. She didn't like titles, but she did like her garden. Every morning she walked with Ghost while Eli packed his school bag. And every afternoon, kids from all over town gathered in her backyard. Not for playdates, but for healing. The program was unofficial at first, just a couple of kids dealing with grief, anxiety, or family trauma. But once word got out that Ghost the Survivor dog was helping children open up when nothing else worked, the town's social workers started calling. Then teachers, then parents. And now every week, groups of children sat in a circle on faded picnic blankets while Ghost made his rounds, tail wagging, calm, watchful, nudging kids out of silence with one paw, one breath, one glance. He wasn't a therapy dog in the traditional sense. He was a dog who remembered what it was like to be scared and what it took to feel safe again. One afternoon, Eli was sitting with a new girl named Ava, who hadn't spoken since her father had left. She didn't meet his eyes, didn't pet Ghost even when he lay next to her patiently. But Eli didn't rush her. Instead, he pulled something from his pocket, Ben's last journal. It had been copied and printed into a soft-cover memorial book, and Eli always carried one with him. He opened it to the middle. There's a story in here, he said, about how Ghost once refused to leave a kid's side. Not even when grown-ups told him to. Not even when they tried to drag him away. Ava peeked up through her lashes. Eli smiled. He stayed. Because that kid mattered. Slowly, Ava reached out. Her hand trembled, and then rested on Ghost's back. He didn't move, just let her feel the warmth of trust. Ava's eyes welled with tears, but she whispered her first words in weeks. "Thank you, doggy." That night, Eli sat under the stars with Ruth. "You ever think it's weird," he asked, "how one choice, like stepping down to the river that day, changed everything?" Ruth lit a match, lighting the bug-repellent candle. "Not weird," she said, "necessary." Eli nodded. "I didn't save him," he said softly. "He saved me too. I just didn't know I needed it yet." Ruth looked at him for a long moment. "You gave him a reason to come back," she said. "Not just from the river, Eli. From everything. You didn't just pull him out. You brought him back to life." In the months that followed, Eli and Ghost were invited to speak at schools across the state. Eli always kept it simple. He didn't need to dramatize. The truth had enough power on its own. He'd stand on stage, Ghost lying at his feet, and say, "Sometimes the people you're told to trust lie. Sometimes the ones the world calls broken are the ones that love the most. And sometimes saving something else saves you right back." That was enough. On the first anniversary of Ben's disappearance, a quiet ceremony was held at the memorial statue. Ben's Aunt Ruth laid down a single yellow rose. Eli brought a photo one Ghost had carried in his mouth all week, gently, like it meant the world. The photo showed Ben and Ghost years ago, side by side. The boy who once saved a dog, and the boy who brought him back. As dust settled, Ghost rested his head on Eli's knee, and Eli whispered, "You're home now, for good. Thank you for following us through this entire journey, from a freezing riverbank to a healing backyard, from secrets buried under concrete to hearts opened under stars. This is more than a story. It's a memory, a legacy, a promise that kindness matters, that listening matters, that sometimes children see more clearly than anyone else." Sydney Atamurum. Now it's your turn. Have you ever had a moment where helping an animal ended up healing a part of you too? Drop your story in the comments, and if this tale moved you, please subscribe to Heroes for Animals, where stories like this remind us what it means to be seen, heard, and deeply loved.